we didn't get a chance to get your opinion on how you would define the political organization in Ethereum. What is your impression there?
Okay, so we've got the foundation. The foundation is the thing which is getting the majority of the code written, but we've also got a whole bunch of different clients which are maintained by different people. So de facto, we've got a reasonable degree of decentralization in that there are a lot of implementations which are not paid by for the foundation. But, is that enough? Depends what your threat model is. Certainly, Vitalik's leadership has been exceptionally good for getting things done. Right? There's a kind of hard burn phase at the beginning of this process where it just required superhuman effort, superhuman commitment, and an enormous kind of inspirational purity. And Vitalik knocked all of that stuff out of the ballpark, which is why we have Ethereum. Whether Vitalik continues to be luminous at that level, or whether he, takes a desk job at university, puts his feet up and becomes an academic computer science professor, we have no idea what Vitalik is going to do with the rest of his life. So the idea that he's going to stay as, an enormously luminous, forward-sighted wunderkind, that's clearly not going to happen. He's either going to mature into a massive political leader on the model of, say, Linus Torvalds or maybe even Musk, or he's going to take an academic computer science list and he's going to go kind of off into that direction, or he's going to wind up doing something unexpected. Right? I mean, he could go in any direction. So I think that it's important that we don't chain ourselves to the idea that Vitalik is going to be the same man he was at 20, at 25, or at 50. Clearly, he's going to change. That will change the Ethereum political system around him, even if nothing else changes. So, we'll see what that does. Similarly, you'd think that we'd be able to build bloody tools for managing these platforms using these platforms.
Yeah,
you'd
bootstrap it.
Yeah, you would think, right? I mean, the thing which is simplest to do is one vote per coin, right? That's incredibly simple to do at a cryptographic level. It's completely objective. Whether it's fair or not depends on who you ask. But you could do one vote per coin, essentially tax raising, where you demurrage the entire currency by, 0.1% a year, and that pays for the development funding, and then you've got a priority queue of things that people vote on one coin per vote. And you could knock that out in Ethereum theoretically in a matter of months. Like, there's no reason that I can think of why that couldn't be done. Maybe you need a state channel or something like that to make it efficient of that much voting going on. But it really seems like the kind of thing you ought to be able to do. So that seems like the next obvious move. Like, I can't see why we wouldn't do that.
Internal governance for cryptocurrency systems.
Well, I mean, isn't that the whole point of these systems?
Maybe.
I mean, I can't imagine why you wouldn't want to do it that way.
Yeah.
It sort of seems like,
Yeah, smart contracts. It's kind of maybe a logical conclusion there.
Well, I mean, it would solve a lot of the problems that we have, that we can't get any kind of authoritative governance. On the other hand, what do we do if only 2% of our people vote, and then you wind up with a bunch of demagogue or ass-clownery running the systems?
Right. Those were some of the critiques of the DAO before it was even exploited.
God, I mean, just after you see an environment where Donald Trump can naturally arise, you really question the integrity of the human race.
Hey, Hitler and plenty of guys out there already did it last century, and
Stalin, Mao, Rick Astley, yeah,
the list goes on. Gabriel and Vinay. We're secretly vampires. Okay, let's talk about the guts of Ethereum a little bit and sort of the plan.
Definitely orc, not a vampire, orc.
Oh, you're an orc. Oh, then I'm not worried about orcs. I'm friends with orcs. It's all good.
Shows. Right, go on. Let's do this.
All right. So, Ethereum has been poo-pooing proof of work, which is the method that Bitcoin uses to basically secure its transactions and prove that you expended the computing power to calculate the transactions on the network. And of course, you have to use electricity to do this, and people decry it for its waste, while supporters say, "Hey, that's the price of having a system that is high security." Say, and Ethereum would love to move to a proof of stake system as soon as next year, I believe. And the researchers in the foundation and elsewhere have been coming up with ideas, white papers for using a different system, proof of stake. Now, proof of stake, one of the simple versions of proof of stake would be everybody who holds some of the crypto tokens, such as Ether or Bitcoin, not in Bitcoin, but it's such as Ether, could be randomly chosen to sign blocks. And that way you wouldn't have a competition of expending ever greater power to compete with each other to receive the new currency that the system creates. First of all, my question is for you, how is proof of stake different from passive property?
So proof of stake could be implemented in one of, I don't know, maybe 4 dozen different ways, right? At one extreme, you have essentially jury duty, right? Where it's an expense that you take on, and if you don't carry that expense, your coins are voided. One approach. All the way through to these kind of plutocratic oligarchical systems where the amount of stake that you put up turns into more essentially interest payments. And there are lots of other mechanisms you could build in between. So there are many different political equilibria within the general bucket called proof of stake. And I am a little bit sketched out by proof of stake. The fundamental computer science problems you need to solve to get a proof of stake algorithm which is truly stable are very substantial. And I would quite like to see that stuff tried at a small scale on somebody else's system pretty successfully for a while.
There's a few altcoins. Yeah, there's Purecoin.
There's these kind of things, right? I'd quite like to see something that was seriously lent on, but that wasn't Ethereum. Let's just sort of see, because the fear that I have is that their systems are so complicated that you wind up with some blindingly obvious moment of hindsight that you figure out just after the value begins to hemorrhage out of the system. Like, oh my God, we're bleeding coins. What the hell has happened? And somebody's like, yeah, I just noticed a problem with our proof of stake math. Right? Because the thing about proof of work is, although proof of work is just an appalling hack, it's an appalling hack that a 5-year-old can validate. Okay, maybe a very bright 5-year-old, but an average hacker could go through the logic to make proof of work on a whiteboard in the course of an hour and completely understand what is happening in the system, right? The proof of stake stuff, I am not a damn guy. I couldn't tell you how the hell Casper worked. I'd need to work for weeks before I wrapped my head around that. And at the end of that time period, whether I could repeat it to another human being in a way that made sense to them would be 50-50. So that tells me that there is a vast possibility of the thing going wrong simply because of the complexity. So the political impact of having proof of stake work is enormously positive in almost all scenarios, but the implementation risk of doing it and then cocking it up is gruesome.
So coming back to the political impact, like I was saying, how is proof of stake different from passive property, which you were decrying in a tweet?
Well, look, so the bottom line is that at an idealist level, it's very clear that property is murder, at least beyond a certain minimum threshold. We operate in a world where 20 million people die for lack of property, and then we act as if property is an inherent human right, except for the people who don't have it. So there's no real way around that, right? As soon as you establish hard property rights as axiomatic inside a society, you accept that people's deaths from lack of property are as natural as people being run over by cars. Well, it turns out if you don't have a stupid system where you put pedestrians and cars in the same space, they stop getting run over. Right? We don't need people on Earth to be dying for lack of property. The fact that we decide that is a natural system that's just always been that way and always should be that way is as stupid as a country which has legal rape. If we decide that rape was state of nature and therefore it shouldn't be illegal, it's as stupid as deciding that poverty is state of nature and we should allow people to starve to death. Right? Starving to death is as stupid a way to die as has ever been imagined, and in a culture that has decided that we want to change the way that human nature operates, the idea that we would change it for physical violence, that we would change it for sexual violence, that we would change it for vaccination, we wouldn't get around to eradicating poverty, is ridiculous. So, I view the world as being literally genocidal against people who are poor because they die by, in the millions. And nobody seems to act as if this is their problem. we act as if it's just natural that people would die of starvation in a world which is producing twice as much food as is required. So, it's very hard for me to do anything other than decide that the problem in that system is that we decide that a hungry person is not permitted to take food, but a fat person is, because of some token called money that they either have or don't have. It's insane, right? So, coming from an absolute perspective, this is how it is. On the other hand, when you get into the simple practical details of how you're going to implement some particular piece of software, frankly, who cares, right? There's political idealism, and there's just get the goddamn job done. And in terms of the Ethereum systems, if I believed that we were architecting the system which was immediately going to wind up with 2 billion users and it was going to change the entire face of the future, you were right. I would probably be much more fussy about this. But I sort of think of all this phase as being prototyping. So maybe I'm not being as careful as I should be. Because if we did have an enormous sudden success with proof of stake, if proof of stake formed the foundation of a scaled blockchain and the scaled blockchain became a single dominant technical architecture, you're right, it would really matter whether or not we had profits based on the stake keys. So that's actually something I need to think about in more detail.
Okay.
Good call.
You've claimed that you were a cypherpunk or in that community in the 90s. The cypherpunks were a group of computer science enthusiasts, you might say, that, as you pointed out, believed in creating, in using cryptography to create freedom, you might say. Recently, you said the cypherpunks failed to create public works. What did you mean by that?
So a good example is public key infrastructure. So we had a couple of things like the PGP key servers and things like that that MIT used to operate, but we never really built out large-scale key distribution architectures. We never really solved the problem of PGP being hard to use. We never got to the bottom of the whole mess, which is X509 certificates. So we never got into a position where we were able to, year after year after year, build and field great new technology. We kind of got some things that worked and they became infrastructure, but we didn't continue to build out on those until we built the rest of the systems. And a lot of that is because we didn't have any new mechanisms for moving money. So the hope is that we've got all this kind of, smart contract infrastructure kicking around, and we ought to be able to use that to maintain large public works projects. It'd be interesting to see how we wind up doing that. Well, the idea that you could basically have demurrage in the currency, where you slightly devalue the currency every year and use the float to go and build the infrastructure necessary to maintain the currency, is essentially what people are hoping will happen with Bitcoin when the mining rewards go down and the transaction fees go up. So it's the same kind of thinking, but you would use it explicitly for fueling the political system that would actually build the next set of features. It is all extremely complicated.
Well, I think that's a good explanation, which is basically they couldn't do public works because they didn't have money yet.
Yeah, and once you've got money, you can't do public works without something that's equivalent to taxation, unless people are very good about paying for the stuff they're using. So these are all sort of problems.
Yeah, I wonder if a transition to an asset-based sort of economic system could conceivably change the incentive structure so that people were more proactive with donation and spending their money in a way rather than being in a state of lack and in a debt-based system. There might be a general move toward an abundance state where things are funded, crowdfunded, and supported and donated to a little bit more. It's conceivable.
Yes, absolutely.
So moving on to your work situation, you are at a company called Consensus. Can you describe briefly what that is and what you do there?
Well, so I was a strategic architect at Consensus, which was basically pretty much a continuation of what I've been doing for the foundation. But this time, instead of spending most of my time talking to the public, I was spending a lot of time talking to companies. What is Ether? What is Ethereum? How does it all work? What could we potentially build for you? I then spent an enormous amount of time and energy setting up a project with the UK government called the Challenger Business Programme. So the UK government has a really, really, really ambitious project running out of UK Department of Business Innovation and Skills to try and mainstream smart contracts into the UK economy as an economic growth area for the UK. And they're they've got a document kicking around which lists the kinds of things that they're interested in discussing, and it's very, very visionary and really, 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 heartening to see from a, sort of, G8 nation state. So I'm very, very happy with that. And I have recently spun up a new project, which is going to be based in the UK and which is going to kind of extend into new directions.
Yes, I wanted to get to that next, so let's talk about it. Recently, you announced this project. The temporary name is Hexayurt Guy Capital Partners.
I'd been really hoping we could call the thing Monster Labs, but apparently it was a little too close to a trademark, so it's not happening.
Maybe Orc Labs.
Well, summon me by my stars.
I'll email you my Orc dictionary. And this company aims to treat startups as financial instruments that transition into businesses using ICOs, that's initial crypto offerings, to...
Well, in the cases where it's legal and appropriate, yeah.
Of course, yeah. And whatever other systems for funding, to build, or for equity rather, to build moonshot platforms that start outlandish and become commonplace.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, actually.
Treating entrepreneurs as scarce but capital as abundant, and to deal with the randomness of prediction and develop businesses at the interfaces of new technology sectors such as drones, blockchain, AI, AR, VR, MR, solar and renewables, and 3D printing. You recently wrote on Reddit, you have to make capitalism work. Do DAOs have the potential to solve the economic conundrum of distribution of ownership? Okay,
so let's start at the beginning of this. What material for people to take in. So the basic thesis of this kind of Hexayurt Guy Capital Partners thing is that if you start using, kind of proper portfolio theory type approaches to, high risk ventures like, early stage companies, you get a very different attitude to the risk implied, right? You also are in a position where, a company that's got a year's worth of development on it, a couple of really good ideas that are quite well fleshed out, and 20,000 interested test users, but no monetization, no billing, none of that stuff is yet built. Something along those kind of lines is closer to being a financial instrument than a company, right? It's a packet of more or less pure risk that might eventually turn into a company, but until you've actually got a business metabolism where you're taking payments from customers and covering your costs, you're not really a company per se. You're this thing which is kind of sliding down into the ground on a trajectory, but it's not until you kind of level out that you're a company, and it's not until you begin to kind of level up that you're actually a success. So I think that this notion that you're basically building more or less pure risk instruments that allow people to explore ideas that potentially bring completely new kind of endeavors into the world, but that are not sort of bound by the same logic of, say, a small or medium-sized enterprise, makes a lot of sense to me. On the DAO side, to be honest, my hope was that we could fund a whole bunch of the people that had hoped to get money from the DAO with alternate funding streams. Because there was a ton of really good thinking about stuff that people wanted to build using the money from the DAO. And when the DAO hit the ground and went splat, all of those people lost access to that route of funding.
I'd like to just mention for our viewers that the concept of a DAO, a distributed autonomous organization, is a very general and relatively new concept in smart contract creation, where you have a company that doesn't have a centralized board, essentially. And this is different from the DAO, which was named after DAO. I think it's a very vague name that Slockit used for this decentralized system that's not... It's only one of myriad examples of what could be a DAO.
Mm-hmm. So I was thinking of that specific, the Slockit DAO, right? So the Slockit DAO, if it had not been a total clusterfuck, could have potentially funded round after round after round after round of innovation around Ethereum, and maybe in other areas. And I thought that was super worth doing. But rather than take another bite at the cherry and have another bunch of smart contracts that may or may not succeed with all the regulatory associated, I thought, why don't we build something that has completely conventional financial structures at every level, that is, white glove, by the book, proper at every level, done in a, crisp and British fashion, right? And then goes and invests in exactly the same kind of crazy technology that I was going to invest in. And that was kind of the seed of the idea, right? I'd been kicking around for a long time this idea that it'd be nice to be able to do something that was largely about my love of talking to intelligent young people about what they're going to do in the future. And the idea that, that was a pretty good fit for VC as a lifestyle seemed like, that seemed like a nice thing. It seemed kind of cool. I'd quite like to do that when I grow up. And then the DAO opened up this urgent need for innovation capital inside of the Ethereum ecosystem. And it was like, well, okay, maybe I should try and build this. So here we are, right? The scope is broader than just blockchains because fundamentally my first technical love was VR. My second technical love was cryptography. So, I can't just sit on the sides of the VR revolution, sitting here hacking on crypto. No. Give me the goggles. I want to go see things that aren't there, right? So, I didn't want to stay constrained to one thing. Artificial intelligence is going amazingly. Oh my God, they've made some strides. So it'd be a shame not to be touching that. And the idea was basically just to try and find, the smartest, coolest, most interesting young people with great projects and capitalize them and encourage them to go out and build the stuff in a really seriously, expansionist fashion.
Did I miss any of those technical areas that you especially are excited about in my list?
Actually, you added a couple of things that I'm not that interested in.
Oh, really?
So, for example, 3D printing is marvelous, but I don't know anything about it. I can't really, I have no way of telling what's a good or a bad idea in 3D printing. So until we find some specialized talent that really knows that stuff, I don't think we'll be doing much around 3D printing, although for the right idea, maybe we'll go and hire the talent just to do the evaluation.
Well, the concept of distributed manufacturing is, of course, very fascinating.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, 3D printers, I don't know. I haven't seen a 3D printed object that I really coveted yet. So they might be really useful.
Electronics. I think we can print up our own laptop. That's going to
industrial parts. I mean, there are probably some killer applications. Medicine, of course, it's a huge thing in medicine. Oh my God. You see people, holding up these, 3D printed bones that were made exactly from their bone. They get MRI and then they print the bone to match. My God, that's amazing. So, I mean, it wasn't on the initial short list of things, largely because I just don't have enough hands-on technical experience. Like, I can basically tell the difference between quite fine graduations, meaning inside most of the technologies that we're talking about. 3D printing, my level of understanding is a little more rudimentary. Same thing for distributed energy stuff. There's amazing things happening in distributed energy. My gut feeling is that most of the heavy plays have too high capital requirements for us to be able to meaningfully play. If you want to go and open a new solar panel factory, that is a little heavy for our pockets.
So will you be looking, as far as the business structure, will you be looking at creating traditional corporations or DAO?
We are going to be the most boring legal entity that we can be, right? Because what we want to do is we want to concentrate all the risk on the part of the business that is investing in the technology and none of the risk in the legal, the governance, or any of the other places it could be.
Okay, but as far as the businesses themselves, you'll be doing a variety of different formations?
As wide as we can possibly cast the net.
Okay.
And what I would hope, if in a couple of years the Ethereum ecostructure has matured to the point where it's really credible and not inappropriately risky to wind up putting tens of millions of dollars into smart contracts, I would love to be able to do things like crowd equity on smart contracts. Right. And, my hope is that the regulators will catch up to the point where that stuff is fully kosher. But I mean, I'm very, very clear that I want to be, smack in the middle of the daylight broad streets of ordinary company structure, with all of the regulatory stuff in place that you would expect. Because I don't want to be in a position where we're taking one bunch of risks with, some kind of newfangled company structure which is not well established to work. At the same time as we're also going out and investing a bunch of other people's money in a bunch of wicked new technology. It's just too much concentrated risk. We want to focus on being quite pedestrian in the structure and then very, very creative in the allocation.
How would you spend $100 billion venture fund?
Did you say? billion?
I did.
Oh,
If you had 100 billion at your
so like if I had the same kind of money sitting in a bank that Apple had.
right. Well,
Apple's got
not in a
about
bank, but you had investors
yeah,
that
had it
go for
as a fund. Okay.
yeah.
So I mean, 100 billion is probably, I don't know, 20 times the size of the largest fund in the world. So this is quite a large fund we're talking about.
Yeah, imagine if some moonshot stuff with crypto happened, something like that.
Yeah. Okay, so I can roll with this. I can roll with this. So this is really the far end of Bond villain territory. So with a fund of that size, the absolutely most logical thing to do is all the legal legwork necessary to be able to directly invest in young people by taking a percentage of their lifetime earnings in exchange for lavishly funding their ideas. So, what I would do is I would basically partner up with individuals at a young age, right? As soon as they're legally able to sign a contract and say, right, you look like a superstar. We are going to give you risk capital on a preferential basis for your entire life, but we own a percentage of the income that comes out of what you do, or something along those lines. Because I think the idea that we're investing in ideas versus investing in people is quite weak. I think there's pretty good evidence that we're really investing in people. Firstly. Secondly, the societal mechanisms of intergenerational wealth transfer are completely destroyed. Right? I mean, there is no sense in which we're providing free educations for one generation on the basis that they earn a bunch of money, which they pay in taxes to take care of the old people. The old people are being left on their own because the pension funds don't have any money in them, and the young people are being left to fend for themselves because nobody will invest in their education. So the idea that you use venture capital as a mechanism for building intergenerational solidarity to fill the gap left by the withdrawal of the nation state seems like a really worthwhile thing to go after if you have a fund of that size.
So a sort of distributed investment infrastructure in young human beings.
Yeah, right? Because what we basically say is, we will preferentially give you the money that you need to develop ideas or get education on the basis that that maximizes your long-term economic impact, and we then take a cut of that impact. And that is exactly the deal that the state used to have with individual youngsters. We'll fund your education and we'll give you government grants to start businesses on the basis that we're going to collect a share of your income in taxation. But now we take the money on the backside through taxation, but we don't invest anything in the young. We've totally broken the social contract with young people, and that's a market opportunity. Excuse me, I have to go wash myself.
Just by saying market opportunity, you feel dirty?
Well, the idea of filling in the space for the withdrawal of the state by stepping into venture capital instead of state-led investment, this gets into things that sound like cyberpunk dealing or cypherpunk dealing in souls. It sounds like something out of the scarier end of the old 1980s literature about what the future was going to be like. Ah, yes,
You've just described my Twitter timeline with basically the 80s version of a cyberpunk future.
But if we had an enormous amount of money, figuring out a mechanism for intergenerational solidarity where old people put in their assets, young people get investment in education and new businesses, and then there's some form of split in revenues or in equity, which results in the old people getting their pensions paid for. That was exactly the way that the welfare state was intended to operate, and it was intensely entrepreneurial because it provided the educational resources and provided the seed capital for a wave after wave after wave of innovation. So the idea that the state has become so weak that private enterprise might have to step into that gap, that's really worth doing. But you need 100 billion to get it started. So, if somebody wants to do it, just let me know if you find it.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to ask, just putting it out there to my viewership.
Just imagine being a young person who had a $250,000 education line of credit drawn against future income, but not in the form of a loan, in the form of an equity split, revenue split. So
makes a lot more sense.
You could get educated in anything that you wanted to get educated in. You'd have enough money that you could go out there and you could do, your PhD in Mongolian throat singing, and then you could go home and finish your PhD in advanced math. And then you could go out there and build a bunch of companies because you'd also be able to get easy access to venture funds. I mean, these kids would be super powered, and I bet they'd wind up running a good chunk of the global economy if you had that as a deal.
Yeah, I definitely see the possibility of that too. And what really resonates.
It's like a trust fund for talent.
Right, exactly. Yeah, what resonated with me in your description of the company as you see the plan was really this idea of treating human beings as scarce and capital as abundant. That's a really good paradigm shift, and it does tie in with this idea of an equity-based or an asset-based system rather than a debt.
Oh, yeah. You bet. I mean, right now, there are something like 15 unicorn companies created each year. So roughly something like 15 companies become billion-dollar enterprises each year. And my guess is that the number of individuals that have direct hands on that process is probably 30 or 60 people per company. They'll be the founder, but they'll also be the founder's older brother who does the accounts for the first 3 years and keeps them from going bankrupt a couple of times. And there'll be, the guy that actually made sure the product came out on time, who was theoretically just a product manager, but actually the whole company hinged on his performance. There'll be a relatively small number of players that made that happen, which means that the vast majority of the wealth in the global economy, which is being created by people, the new wealth, or the wealth, the things that we recognize as new wealth, it's only a few thousand people a year that are actually hands-on in that process. And the notion that those people are relatively scarce, Apple has $180 billion of a cash reserve. They're not short of money. What they're short of is talent to turn the money into better Apple products.
Yeah, and this is where distributed autonomous organizations can flip the script as well. If you've got 10 million people sharing in the success of an organization, it almost isn't even a company anymore. Then it's kind of a movement in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sort of stuff. I mean, much as I hate the kind of potential for Ponzi schemes and other abuses of the DAO concept, I can't imagine that, basically equity crowdfunding is not the future of the world. I did a talk on this in Wales a couple of years ago about equity crowdfunding, and I just really believe that equity crowdfunding is how we re-democratize capital.
I can't disagree with you. All right, let's take a left turn and go totally weird to wrap up this fantastic talk with Vinay Gupta. My question is, are you ready? Here we go. Do you think it's possible that ultra-advanced technology such as free energy, anti-gravity, wormholes, or time travel might be possessed by a tiny faction of people in the world?
This is the breakaway civilization thing. Yeah, of course. No doubt about it, right? Let me give you a simple, completely conservative example of this, right? The NSA has something like 50 years of classified mathematics, right? So without any shadow of a doubt, if you are an extremely advanced student of mathematics, there are things that the NSA knows that you don't know and that you would really, really like to know. And we're not talking about, simple, shiny new technology like your wormhole generator. What we're talking about is understandings about the fundamental nature of reality.
E equals MC squared, etc.